a great future ahead of them without being able to have an education and being able to communicate. And so we were just became burdened for him because this is a kid who comes to church, but he can't hear the gospel. He can't understand what's happening. And we need to be able to share the gospel with him. And so exciting, we just got him in school a couple months ago. And so he is learning sign language right now and in school with a bunch of kids, and his life's going to change forever. And our teammate Aslan is learning sign language and can't wait for the moment that she'll be able to sign the gospel, the good news to this kid for the first time. So God's been doing some cool stuff in that, but again, we're still asking God for some more people to join our team. But anyways, that is the 6 Degree initiative, our whole team, our whole project, everything that we're moving towards. So like I said, Ashley and I are just a piece of this puzzle, and it's growing, and God's been doing some things that we'll get to talk more about later that is just moving ministry forward in rapid ways that honestly we're just trying to keep up with what God's doing. So I'll let Ashley share a little bit about her and what she gets to do.
All right. So my name is Ashley, and I'm excited to be here with you guys today. And since it's my first time here, I thought I'd just share a little bit about myself. So my name is Ashley Freeman now. Got to get used to that. But I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm so glad some of the kids are in here this morning because my story with missions started when I was a kid, and God just started working on my heart. And I remember telling my parents and my grandparents that I wanted to be a missionary dentist. And that kind of changed along the way, you know, how kids go and changing what they want to do with their lives. But when I was in high school, I surrendered to missions, but I thought, are you sure you've got the right person, God? Because I don't like to stand up in front and talk in front of people unless they're like this tall. And so I knew that going to the mission field required a lot of talking to adults. And so I just wasn't sure that God had the right person, but he just kept working in my heart. And then when I was in college, I had some friends, and we were praying about taking a missions trip to Africa. And we were praying, and we're thinking that the doors were going to be closed. But then our now team leader, JJ and Melissa Alderman, they came to chapel and just shared what they were going to be doing in Togo. And so we thought maybe this is God's answer to our prayer, and sure enough it was. We went up and talked to them. They invited us to their home. They shared more, and they invited us to come over and visit them in Togo. And so two of my gals, my friends, and I went to Togo just about a month or so after they landed in Togo there in the South for the first time. And so we got to see the very beginning of ministry there, and we were really helping them unpack things and get their home set up, and we would go out and try to build relationships as much as we could without speaking the language, and they had church in their front yard in the gazebo, and so it was really cool to get to experience that the beginning of what it looks like to get on the field, and just had so many good conversations about what it looked like to get to the mission field, this part that I was most scared about. And so, just learned a lot. And Melissa encouraged me to finish school and get my degree, which I was already planning on doing that, but also to get to some experience teaching. So my degree is in elementary education, and I ended up teaching for 4 years in elementary school. So 5th grade for 2 years and 1st grade for 2 years. And every year I was like, all right, God, I did it. I taught another year. Where are you going to send me next? And just exploring opportunities, and God kept closing doors. And so I just kept plugging away and being obedient to where he had called me for that time. And God taught me a lot during that season, so I'm so thankful. But my 4th year of teaching, JJ and Melissa invited me to come back. And so it was really exciting to go back 5 years later, get to be there for the 5th year anniversary of the church, and to see it had gone from that little gazebo with a couple people to property with buildings and with so many kids. And God has given me a heart for kids since I was really a kid. And so I was so excited to see that. And parents from all different religious backgrounds, Voodoo, Muslim, whatever, they were sending their kids to church, not realizing that they're little sponges soaking up everything they're hearing. And so I just saw an awesome opportunity to get to be part of reaching the kids in Togo, and then seeing their lives changed and the lives of their families changed. And so I committed to Togo, and I moved over there in 2017, and so just celebrated my 4-year anniversary of living over in Togo, and I get to do kids ministry, and I love it. So really my role is to help start kids ministry, but really to train up leaders to be able to take over the children's ministry. So really trying to work myself out of a job, as sad as it is, because I love getting to work with the kids in our churches, really training up leaders so that they can do the ministry there. And so yeah, that's what my role is in Togo and what I've been doing for the last 4 years. And then Josh came over in 2020.
March 2020, right before something called COVID happened. And so I was there for 28 days before our whole team had to evacuate. And so, but we've been back since last October, so.
Yeah. So he was coming to lead the church planting project, which I was already working on church planting with the kids. And so my team leader and his wife were preparing me. I'm not a big fan of change, which I signed up for a life of change by becoming a missionary. But so they were preparing me for Josh coming and for him being my leader. And so anyways, but we didn't get to do that very, very long. 28 days in, we left and came back to the States because of COVID. And but we got to work a lot together during COVID over Zoom. And so we worked on a new kids curriculum, which I'll tell you about in a little bit, and worked on some internship things. And that's kind of where the sparks started flying. We just found that we really worked together well. We complemented each other well. And the calls would kind of start lingering to past work stuff. And finally, he worked up the courage to ask me if I would be willing to get to know each other even better. And so here we are today. And that's kind of our story. And it's really cool. I thought when I was signing up to move to Togo and be a missionary that I was really signing up for a life of singleness. And I was okay with that. But God had bigger and better plans for me. And so I'm thankful that we get to do life and ministry together in Togo. So, yep, that's us. I talked about the kids curriculum that we worked on during COVID. Josh talked to you about the Timothy initiative. And so they start with their Tituses with DMD, disciples making disciples. And so we thought, what if we could start that in the kids with the kids, and by the time they're ready to plant a church, they've already had that foundation. They're already making disciples. It's not waiting till they become an adult to start making disciples. And so we kind of just kidsified that curriculum, and so we were able to start that in January. And we start with God's story and talk about God is our Father and how he's loving, he disciplines us, he provides, and he protects us. And we also are teaching them how to share the gospel. And we use the bridge illustration as a way to do that, where man and God are separated by our sin, but the cross fills that gap. And so they're learning to share the gospel, which is what, this is Bernadette, and she's about 12 years old, and she's practicing sharing the gospel with her cousin, actually right there. And so it's exciting to see them learning and growing in being able to share the gospel with their friends. But we started out the curriculum. We started with an empty tree. It's a little bit hard to see there, but there's a couple leaves on the tree there. But each of our brick and mortar churches, we have 3 of those, they started with an empty tree, representing all the opportunity we have to share Jesus with other people. And so every time they shared the story they learned in church that week, or they shared the gospel, or they shared their testimony, they would tell us about it. They would tell us who they shared with, what they shared, and their friend's response. And then they would get to add a leaf to the tree. And so it was really awesome. They weren't just soaking it in and keeping it for themselves, but they were sharing with other people. And so by the end of the 4 months, there were 200 leaves on all of our trees across the 3 churches. And then we also had 2 fruit, because the fruit represent those who accepted Christ. And so we had a little 8-year-old boy who got to lead 2 of his friends to Christ. And so it was really exciting for us to see the kids obeying and sharing the truth. So Here they are adding some leaves to the trees. These are some of our faithful ones who are sharing it every week with their friends and family. And then at the end of the time there, you can see our tree there at Grace Church in Sangor, and it's just full of leaves. And then that day, the last day, we told them to invite their friends, and we shared the two kingdoms, God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom, and how they could pass from Satan's kingdom into God's kingdom. So they were inviting all their friends, and we had over 200 kids at Grace Church that week. So lots of kids in the community are getting to hear the gospel. My favorite is when they get to hear it from one of their friends. And so God is doing great things there with our kids' ministries. And then one of my favorite things every year is kids camp. I loved going to camp as a kid, and I love getting to do camp with the kids there in Togo. And so we had 3 camps this year, and our second camp was at the Way of Christ. This was a new church plant. It started in maybe May, I think, and we had the camp in July. So a very new church. And we usually start camp. It was a 4-day camp, and we usually stop registration after the second day because small groups is the most important time for us because that's where a lot of the gospel conversations happen. And so we want to build the confidence in the group and not just keep adding and having kids not want to share. And so we usually do that. But at the Way of Christ Church, the 3rd day, there were 40 kids who showed up, and we were like, we can't turn them away. We have to figure out something. And so, thankfully, we've been working on raising up leaders for our kids' ministries, and so we had a ton of helpers, and so we were able to pool a guy and a girl, and so they had small groups of 20 kids each, which wasn't so small. But a lot of those kids were asking the question, wait, who is Jesus? They had never heard the name of Jesus before, and so they were hearing the gospel for the first time, and a lot of those kids gave their lives to Christ that week. And so it was really exciting to see God work there. It's a really dark village. Even as our leaders, our Togolese leaders were walking around to invite people at the beginning, and they were telling us how they could feel the darkness. And so to me, that says a lot about the spiritual oppression in the communities there. But we prayed and we saw God do great things. And that week, about 91 kids accepted Christ, and that was with one-on-one individual conversations with these kids to make sure they truly understood what they were saying yes to. And so this is the inside of the church there, the Way of Christ. And then there were people on the outside, and then this isn't even all. There's parents on benches over there too. There were some boys who were working with the cattle who were sitting there listening the whole time, and at the end of the week they asked, what is all of this about? And they were able to trust Christ as well. And so God did some great things during our 3 weeks of camp, and so we're so thankful for that. This is our group of leaders that helped work with us, and you can see there's some college students from America up there, and so Josh is going to tell you a little bit about our internship program.
Yeah, so it was just amazing to see in what God was doing at the Way of Christ, and excited to share more, even in the sermon, about that church and what God's doing through it. We have interns there, and they're with us for 7 weeks over the summer, and we had a blast with them. And so that is a huge opportunity that we love, because we say all the time, our team leaders, all of us that are on the field, we are so thankful for the people that poured into us and got us to help us get to where we're at today. And we want to give back and do that for the same for college students as well, or older high school students. And so, oh yeah, I don't need to hold that. Thank you. So they came over for 7 weeks, and that internship actually starts a little bit before that. We say yes around October time, around this time, and then come January, they're starting to read books, and we read a lot of books together that are very intentionally chosen, that are hopefully going to start conversations based off of, ministry and whatnot. So the idea is for interns to come and not necessarily feel called to missions, but maybe have the question of, what does God have for my life? I was just at, one of my best friends just planted a church in Orlando, Florida, 3 weeks ago now, and he was an intern with the Togo team as well, the Sixth Degree Initiative, several years back. That's where he met his wife. They started dating on that trip. They're married, and they planted a church. And so he talks about that on the day that he launched his church, about how the internship changed his life. And really, it was that time that they were doing ministry for 7 weeks in Togo that they felt the call to be a part of church planting, and they were thinking that God was calling them specifically somewhere in America. And so to just see the fruit of that about 4 or 5 years after that, so it's always the idea of we want to give people the opportunity to see, live. You get to do everything with the missionary. You eat with us, you live with us, you work with us, you see everything that we do in ministry, in life, and the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And we like to say too that it's a time not only to discern what God's calling you to do necessarily in Togo, but if God's calling you somewhere else, we have great friends all around the world with Converge that are doing ministry, and there's tons of opportunities. And so we just like to accept the people to come and explore, what is it that God has for my life? What is it that He is going to use? And we spend a lot of time together. We'll do ministry together. We'll share the gospel together. We'll go do some even little projects here and there to help the churches out that need some help. And then we'll do some, sometimes if we're planting a church, we maybe do some prayer walks beforehand, get to be a part of entering a new community before we ever get there and plant a church. Summer camps, our interns helped with our camps, and that was a blast. But then other times we go up to the mountains of Togo and get away for a little bit, for a couple days, and just try to hear from God, listen to Him. We're in the Word together, usually go through a book of the Bible together and just ask, God, what is it that you have for me? And so that is a huge opportunity. If you know somebody that is in the junior, senior in high school, or in the college age, or even a little older after college, this is a great opportunity that we love to do. And so if they're interested, let us know, because we are accepting applications and giving out some yeses already to a few people. And even in the summers to come, if you have friends or family, or you yourself are thinking about it, please let us know, because it's a great time. And so that's an internship, and something that we love to get to be a part of and work on that team with. Then now I'll just tell you a little bit more about who I am and my story real quick. I've been here about 2 years ago now. It wasn't in this building. This was like getting built. It was almost done, but it hadn't been done at that point. And so it's been a while. At that point, I had not been to Togo yet, or not moved to Togo at that point. And so I moved, like I said, back in March of 2020, and have been there. And so a little bit before, I grew up in ministry. My dad's a pastor, and I always said, I'm never going into ministry. That's not for me. But God had different plans, obviously. So I was a big soccer player, played since I was 4 years old. Got to Trinity Baptist College in Jacksonville because of the soccer coach who recruited me. It was not to go to do ministry or anything like that. It was just to play soccer. But while I was there, felt God was calling me to be a part of full-time ministry in that first year that I was there. And so dedicated my life to that. Didn't know what or where, so I got really involved in student ministry. And the church, Trinity Baptist Church in Jacksonville, that is connected to the college, I worked with them as an intern and started, when they launched a new campus, I went with them, and we started, and I was a part of launching the new student ministry and whatnot. Tons of fantastic, amazing experience in pastors and people who poured into me, and learned a lot. But I remember entering my summer before I was going to go to my senior year of college, thinking maybe student pastor at this new campus will be what I'll do, or I don't know. But God was just moving in my heart, and I just felt like maybe that wasn't what God had for me. And so I started using that summer to really pray and seek God on what is it that He has for me. And I met J.J. Alderman, who's our team leader in Togo, who was on furlough, and he was sent out, graduated from that college at Trinity as well. And so he was back on furlough, and we got coffee. I remember sitting down with him saying, hey, had some friends say I should have coffee with you, but I want you to know, I'm not thinking mission, so don't try to recruit me. And he didn't. He didn't recruit me for a good 2 months or so. And he was just pouring into me, giving me books to read, things to think about, to pray about. And in that time, I really felt that God was had gifted me to be a part of church planting. Now, I thought that was going to be here in the U.S. somewhere, but I knew I wanted to go wherever I could have the most influence possible with the gospel. I want to go where places that need churches and people that need Jesus. And so I just didn't know where that was or what that looked like at the time. And then I remember having coffee again with JJ a little bit later, and that's when he finally painted the picture of what we're doing in Togo and said, hey, you can be a part of planting a church, or do you want to be a part of planting hundreds of churches? And I was like, ooh, that sounds pretty good. So I jumped on board with that team in 2016 and have been, got there, like I said, in 2020. So I'm on the field for a year and a half now. And it's been a whirlwind, obviously, with COVID and all of that. Our team getting sent off the field, but still getting to work on building all of the ministries and projects that we're rolling out right now is because we worked on that during COVID. And our internship program, our DMD kids, all of this stuff was a part of that process. And so get to Togo. And so, yes, learned French. So I just finished up my French studies right before I got on the plane to come back to get married. So fluent, they would say, in French. You never feel fluent. I feel like you always feel like you can learn more. I definitely can. But yeah, so able to preach and teach and do ministry in French, which is huge weight off now. Get to just focus full time on all of that. But in this last year, some fun things that we got to do and be a part of is some of our baptizing a couple guys. And so two of these guys are church planters with us, or one of them is planting a church. The other one was actually a Titus of somebody and is about to be a Timothy, and he's already starting to plant a church in this village. And so it's just a blast to get to be a part of baptizing some of these guys who are entering the ministry as we speak. Some that are Cujo on the left there. He is in a village, and I'll share a little bit of his story in the sermon later. And so he is planting in a village where there were no known believers. In fact, a couple of years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, he wasn't a believer himself. And so just to see what God has done in his life is incredible. And then Remy on the right there, he is a believer in the last year, I think. And he ended up being led to the Lord by the pastor of New Life Church, our first church plant, Jonas. And he'd been discipled, and right before he was getting baptized, he did the baptism course that we do and whatnot. And so as a celebration, as a commitment to God, what he did is he gathered all of his family idols, the idols that thank you so much. Very kind. All of the idols that their family worships and whatnot, and they got all of them, and he chucked them into the lake to say, my family, I'm not going to do this, and my family is not going to worship these idols anymore. And so that changes an entire family tree right there. Now, people that are born into this family, they won't know that. They won't know that as we have to worship these idols because they are what protect our family. And so just incredible things that God has been doing. And so, through that, we've also been, preached. Yeah, did some preaching and whatnot. And so this is the area of Sangor where our third church plant is. And this is where we've planted Grace Church. And it is heavy, dark area. So this is a place in this last year we've seen a lot of spiritual warfare and whatnot. When we first got back from COVID, sadly, we had to do some church discipline with the former pastor there who had fallen into sin while we were back during COVID. And so we had to have him step down from his role and pull in another pastor who is now pastoring and leading this. And so you could see how it's hurt the area as being one of the only churches, gospel-centered church in that village. So to kind of build from that, we saw a lot of kids not come anymore. Adults weren't coming, and you could feel that there was a battle going on. And so this is back in February, March, somewhere around then, where we decided we were going to do a virtual prayer walk, where we're going to call our partners and churches back in the U.S. and do a Zoom call, and we're going to go through different parts of this village. This village has 7 witch doctors in a 1-mile radius, idols everywhere. You can see one down in the bottom right-hand corner of of the picture. And it's just a place that needed the gospel and needed people to pray over it. And so we spent an hour on Zoom going from place to place. We were praying over witch doctors' homes. We were praying over the church or the soccer field where we play soccer and do evangelism, over specific kids' houses and stuff like that. And so from that time, we saw God do something incredible. We saw somebody, a woman, give her life to Christ that day, about an hour after we did the prayer walk. She came to her faith in Christ, and then the very next Sunday, she brought her husband to church, which culturally is unheard of, and so brings her husband. He gives his life to Christ, and Raphael now, he is as on fire for God as you could see. He's been a believer for about 3 months or so now, and he led his first person to the Lord about 2 months or a month ago or something like that, 6 weeks or so ago. And you're seeing people in that village, their life starting to change, and people really grasping the gospel. But as much as we're seeing God move, the enemy continues to fight back. This is our soccer field. Sorry, go back. This is where right outside of our church, and my friend Charles is up there. He's sharing the gospel. And in this picture, when you go to the next one, this is an idol. So as that picture is being taken, he's sharing the gospel. And up the road, like 50 yards away maybe, this is being built. Right there. And so this is an idol that they came together, and the witch doctors came together, and they were going to build this idol as we are on the soccer field sharing the gospel 1 week after we did this prayer walk and see people come to Christ. And so it was an example of like, man, this is a real battle that we are fighting. And so we're over there, and Charles is sharing the gospel, and he's able to point over and you see that idol, that's made by man. But we were made in the image of God already. And being able to just physically share the gospel and say, why would you worship something that is made by human hands, that has no power, but instead worship the one true God who has created you? And so that is what was a wild, surreal moment as we were out there sharing the gospel and playing soccer with these kids. And so, but we've seen God move in some mighty ways, and more people coming to church now. And as I was talking to the pastor this morning of this church, and they're continuing to grow and seeing more people come to faith in Christ and come to the church to be discipled. And so God has been doing some amazing things in Togo right now, and specifically at Grace Church. And so what's really exciting is this is our whole team, just so you can see a little bit of what we look like and who we are. And this is a big group of people. We are not the only ones there. And so we're really thankful for our team and excited for what God's going to do in the future. And so with that, we just recently had a big church gathering where we brought all of our churches together. So we have 3 brick and mortar churches, and we build brick and mortar churches in areas that are more urban. And so kind of church planting here in America, how you would do that. And so then we go to the areas that society is moving towards. Schools are being built, water's coming, electricity's moving. That's where we want to build the hubs, and then these will train pastors and leaders and send them out to the more rural areas. And so we brought all of them together, 3 brick and mortar churches, and we now have 17 churches all together. And so we brought everybody together for a big celebration to just say, this is what God has been doing. This is what God has done over the last 10 years. And we went from 3 churches to 17 in the last 2 years. So God's really been starting to hit the multiplication. And so now we celebrated together, and now we're asking the question, okay, we're at 17 churches. What is it going to take to get to 50? And so the time of just celebrating what God has been doing, but then say, okay, there are people here, villages, areas that don't know Jesus, that don't have a church, that don't have the gospel yet. Are you going to be the one to take it to them? And so it was an incredible, incredible time to just bring everybody together and see what God's going to do. And so this is one of our church planters, Etienne, the Way of Christ. We've been talking a lot about that. I'm going to share a lot more about his story in the sermon, but God's been doing incredible stuff through guys like Etienne, and he's just a normal guy. You know, he actually even has a stutter. He doesn't love standing up in front of people and teaching and preaching, but he will do whatever he has to make sure people that don't know Jesus. And so just regular, ordinary men that are saying, and women who are saying yes to Jesus, and I want to bring the gospel to people and places that don't know Jesus. And so that's just what God's been doing even in the last year, and our whole team has been incredible to watch what God does. So just want to update you on what you guys get to be a part of. And so you support us through prayer and finances, and this is what the result is. And so I just want you to know that you have a piece in this. And so we're so thankful to partner with churches like Overland that are committed to getting the gospel to the ends of the world, and we're seeing it happen in Togo. And so I just want to thank you for everything that you guys have done and are a part of, and say, hey, keep joining with us, keep praying with us, keep being a part of what God's doing in Togo, because it's not done yet. We're just getting started. So thanks again. And so we'll open it up for questions now. I think if we have some time. Is that good, Josh? Yeah. If there's any questions at all? Yeah.
So 17 churches in about how large of a geographic area?
It's spreading out slightly. So in a triangle, we have about a 50-mile radius. Ish, 40 to 50. So right now where our churches are, we're probably only about 10 to 15 mile radius spread apart. So yeah, and most of them are clustered in the city of Anejo. And so I would say the majority of them are closer to 5 miles or so radius wise. So if we go village by village, really is the idea. And so if there isn't a church in that village, the odds of somebody leaving their village to go to somebody else's village to a church are unlikely. So, yeah.
So the country speaks French, but when you're going to like the untreated or
Yeah.
dialects?
Yeah, so most of the people groups that we're in at the moment speak Ewe or Mina. And so everything, mostly where we work as leaders is we work with the leaders, and so they're the ones that are going out to these more rural areas, and they're taking the gospel. We don't know Mina or Eve, we know French, and so the leaders that we work with, they know French as well, and so we're training and developing them, but they're going to take it out. So most of these villages where we have churches, I've never stepped foot in and won't, because honestly, we may not help it. We may make it worse in some way. So yes, most of the ministry on the ground that's happening with our leaders is not being done in French. It's being done in another language. Now, however, in the brick and mortar churches, French is the language that you have to learn if you go to school. So if they're in a more urban setting and they're going to school, they'll know French. But even at our churches, brick and mortar churches, we will always translate French to Eve or Eve to French, just to make sure that if there's somebody there that doesn't know French well, that they can still hear the gospel. Yeah, and there's Bibles printed in Eve and Mina and French, so they have plenty of resources for that.
You just said that going into those villages, that you could make it worse. How?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, so white means money in Africa. So you can get a lot of, yes, I want to follow Jesus, but really I just want to be next to the missionary. And then the missionary leaves, and then our church planter is left with a ton of expectations that he can't meet anymore. And so whether we are giving money or not, just our presence in turn turns that into, it can be unhealthy. And so we can slow things down quickly and we're thinking more long-term as well. We could go into a village and see hundreds of people show up, and that would be fun, but then what happens when we leave? And so that's really what we're thinking more of. Now, again, in the more urban areas, that's totally fine. They see white people all the time. It's a different mentality, but the more rural areas where they haven't seen a lot of white people, then yeah, that's really just as basic as it gets is, white means money. That's just what it means.
Do you run into any other kind of roadblocks besides voodoo and some of the things that you easily think about, like having witch doctors in the village? But are there laws or restrictions, things that prohibit you guys from building in locations? What are some of the hurdles that you have to overcome?
Yeah, that's great. There's some new restrictions because of COVID now, but that's the world. But for the most part, it's fairly open. everything moves slower. So to get land grants, stuff like that, as a foreigner, we cannot own land. So what we have is a board. It's actually multiple organizations in Togo that are together. A Togolese has to own the land, but we actually buy our properties and whatnot for our church plants through this nonprofit organization that we've created and developed and are on the boards and whatnot. So it is held by this organization, which is Togolese, but so that can become a little difficult at times. Really what it has to do, I mean, we were in a battle trying to, with the camp land, we had bought that land or tried purchasing that land for, it took 7 years, and you have to get the signatures of everybody that have owned the land, and there was one signature missing, and it took 7 years. It was just this past year during COVID that we received the final signature. That's not totally common, but it's not crazy uncommon either. And then, a year or two ago, we had a problem with one of our church plants where the owner decided to say, oh no, I didn't sell this part of the land to you, and I'm taking you to court, and, just creates a lot of problem. That has since ended. We're totally fine on it. We had all of our documents, but it's little stuff like that. I don't think it's totally different from America at times when it comes to that, but there is definitely a lot different views, and everything takes a lot longer. Everything takes longer in Togo. So as far as moving things forward, I mean, right now we're building a new guest house property for churches and people that are coming over to visit. And we had to, ask for electricity to be brought to us. And there's only one person in the entire country that says yes or no to electricity. So we're waiting like 6 months or so before we even get a yes on if we can have it or not and what the process that gets it. So everything just takes a lot longer, I would say. Yeah. But as far as like political, nobody's against us doing churches and planting churches. At the moment, things change quickly in Africa. But right now, everything is pretty open when it comes to that. Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer because voodoo is not a written religion. It's a way of life, they would say. And so the witch doctors are on every corner. Really. And so they're the guys that kind of drive culture and community. And so people come to them for sicknesses, to get better grades on tests even, like whatever it is, they're coming to them. They're the gurus, the people that kind of move culture and whatnot. So as far as it depends on what gods or what, so voodoo in general, you have your different deities, so the sun, the moon, the ground, but then there's even deities within those. You have the snakes. The Awida Benin are known for being snake worshipers and whatnot. And so really the idea is it's what they're saying is these are the gods that protect them and their family. Okay, so they have idols. They have family idols, and then they have community idols, and then they have regional idols, and they have to give different sacrifices to those, whether that be chickens or fruits or vegetables, or sometimes it's candy. Depends on what the idol is needing. And so so there's a lot of different rituals that they do. Everybody has their own festival. Every region has their own festival. So like in Anejo, it's known as the Festival of the Stone, where they come together and the stone is going to tell them how the year is going to play out, pretty much kind of futuristic, like it's going to be a good year, it's going to be a bad year or whatnot. And so they all come together and they do different rituals. And I don't even know what all those rituals are at times. It's pretty closed off and not a place that I'd really want to be and in the moments that they're doing it. But pretty much somebody will find a stone and then he will be elected the main witch doctor of the region for that year, and he now tells everybody what that looks like. So it goes from village to village, from family to family. It looks drastically different, but really the idea behind it is it's a fear-power culture. And so there's a power in witchcraft and voodoo, the enemy, we know that. And then there's that fear that they're driven by, that if we don't worship this, if we don't sacrifice this, then bad things will happen to our family because of this God, or this deity or this idol. So, I could talk for hours on that stuff and tell you different things that we've seen and know of and whatnot, but it's it's really hard to. I mean they'll tell you if you talk to anybody in Togo, a witch doctor in Togo, they all have a different thought on what it is, and it's not written. It's not a real religion in that sense. So.
Does that make it pretty hard, like you're presenting, say the fall story?
Mm.
Does it make it easier for them to understand it?
Sure.
Or is it way harder?
So honestly, there is a piece of it, like as far as the spiritual side goes, really easy for them to understand, whereas it's not as easy to understand here. Dark and light, they really understand that. So one of the ways we share the gospel is the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. That makes sense to them. Most of them know that voodoo and witchcraft is dark. They know that. And so in some ways it is a lot easier. But then now the problem and things that our church planters are facing is they're going into areas that are saturated with this. They grew up worshiping this. And so to leave it, they're afraid to leave it because they're told that the voodoo will kill them if they leave voodoo and they worship something else. And so that's really what grips them and saturates it, is their protection. So when it comes to sharing the gospel, in some ways it's a lot easier to share. They get it, but it's then to help them make that first decision and step to say no to voodoo and no syncretism, the mixing of Christianity and voodoo together. That's the harder process to get them to. Yeah.
So just taking that one step further, maybe it's the idea of light and darkness. What would you say is either a similarity or discontinuity that you've noticed in that culture that is just an aha moment as you look at this culture, the culture you came from, that how you would help us to
Yeah.
preach the gospel more effectively here? Just observations you had there.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say we have to be, we're trained as missionaries to be students of the culture. And I think that's the same thing here. We have to be trained to be students of the culture in the sense of knowing, it's called the 3D Gospel. It's a book, super short and simple. I would recommend that for anybody that wants to share the gospel more effectively. And so every region of the world has a different, so like in Africa where we're at, it's called a fear-power culture. So they're driven by fear and power. That is their value system. They would say in the West, in America, that we're driven by guilt and justice. And so the way we communicate the gospel, and we do it already, is we talk about, the sin, the wages of sin is death, right? We're talking that monetary system. And, there's obviously, if we owe something, we should be paying it back. But Jesus in grace, showed himself. And so that is already kind of a way that we tailor it to our culture, I think, in guilt and justice. And so what we do in there is actually, we use the same verses, the same message, but it's interesting what they grasp onto deeper. And so they're going to grasp onto death out of that one, not the wages. They're gonna say, this is the power, the chains that are broken when the gospel, so it's that kind of concept. So I would say, just in general, as you're going about in America and whatnot, it's studying what is that. And I think if you can do that on an individual basis, too, and knowing what are their value systems, that people that we're talking to, the areas of even the country that we're in. Bible Belt, where I grew up, is going to be totally different than the Northeast or the Northwest or California. That's a great question. And that's what I would say, is be a student. There's a big Asian area. That's a big deal. So, like son, one of the biggest things it speaks to an honor-shame culture is the fact that the father ran to his son, because for us, I would say it's more spiritual warfare as far as persecution goes, but for the believers, it's a hard thing to say yes to. Yeah.
My questions are more related to you and Ashley.
Sure.
Speak a little bit to your formal training.
Do you want to hit that?
He's from Trinity Baptist College. Like I said, mine was in elementary ed, and his was in church ministry. And then through the Converge process, we get a lot of training that's required of us. And so, like, one of the things, training,
Yep.
so learning the things that we're going to face as we enter into a new culture. Then there's the perspective course. So different trainings that working on getting masters through Sioux Falls Seminary. So yeah, just continual learners.
Yeah. And go ahead.
The Converge training, is
Yes.
that in residence training?
So Converge is our missions organization that we're sent out of. And so with that, like to get accepted, we go through a 3-day intensive assessment process to see if like this is a good fit and we're healthy to be on the field and whatnot. And so they do that. And then once you get a green light or a yes, you then have different things that you have to do, the books that you read. And so it's not a residency that we're there. Now CIT was a month long in North Carolina where we lived on site and did training with them, perspectives. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can do it online, you can do it in person. And so there's a lot of different ways to be able to do that kind of stuff. But yeah, and then with Converge, we have coaches that are continually connecting with us on a regular basis, checking in on just mental, emotional, physical health as well as we go about. And then, yeah, just regular biblical degrees that we're continuing to pursue. Yeah.
Josh, just for the sake of our audience,
Yes.
Converge is also the Baptist Association our church is part of. It's not
There.
something we talk a whole lot about. So
Got it.
when he says Converge, that is the same Baptist Association that Overland Hills is part of.
Yes. So, yeah. Exactly.
Another follow-up.
Yeah.
I've looked at the composition of the religions within Togo in particular.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's a high percentage of Christian, term Christian.
Yeah.
I don't know what you find there.
Yeah.
And to bring something to others
Yeah.
and actually live there and experience it. Do you find any, do you cooperate or find support from any indigenous evangelical communities?
Yeah, I would say it's growing for sure. It always depends on what organization or what website we're looking at for percentages with that. Some will automatically say, oh, a Catholic church, okay, it's a Christian believing church. And so there's some issues there. There's other denominations that are there where there's one in a village that a very prominent denomination. And you talk to the believers and it's works-based salvation that is being preached and taught and whatnot. So time is coming to an end here. So I'll quickly wrap this up. So I would say in the more northern areas is where there have been missionary influence for years. In the specific areas of the country that we are targeting and located, there's been zero. So that is really where we're pinpointing in that southern region. The more north you go, the more influence there has been. And absolutely, there are great churches and great believers that are continuing to be developed and formed throughout the country, not with us. So, and with other organizations. So, yeah.
All right. Well, so we're going to have to end it there. But just as a plug, for after the church, I chatted with Josh and Ashley. They're going to stick around afterwards, and we're going to kind of just order pizza. If you have more questions, you just want to hang out and chat, we're just going to have just pizza for, the family or whoever wants to stick around after church today. So think of more questions and come up and follow up with them later. But if I could pray for you to end our Sunday school time, and then we'll kind of get ready for church service. So let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this morning. Thank you for bringing Josh and Ashley to us this morning. What a blessing it is to see how you're working in a different country, different culture around the world, but your gospel is still going out in power. And we have brothers and sisters in Christ who we've never met, but we are partnering with them, and we are of one body. And so we thank you for sending Josh and Ashley and letting us be a part of that ministry. And so, Lord, I just pray that you continue to watch over them, protect them, and bring them back home to Togo safely, and then hit the ground running, just being excited about the ministry that you've called them to, now working together. And so, Lord, we just pray all the blessing for them, and may you be glorified by all that they do in service and worship to you. Amen. All right, you're dismissed. Thank you.